I've been a long-haul trucker for most of my adult life, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the American desert has a way of swallowing sound, light, and sometimes sanity. But nothing prepared me for what happened on a run through the Mojave in 2017. It was after midnight, the road stretched endlessly in front of me, and my headlights barely pushed back the darkness. They had been dim for months, and like an idiot, I kept putting off getting them fixed. When you're surrounded by nothing but pitch-black desert, even a small problem starts feeling deadly serious. The white lines on the asphalt vibrated in my tired vision. The radio had lost signal ages ago, leaving nothing but a whisper of static, like someone trying to talk to me from the dark. My mirror showed only an empty road behind me. No headlights, no taillights, nothing. Just darkness thick enough to feel. I remember passing an old half-collapsed gas station that looked abandoned since the 90s. About 20 miles later, something caught the edge of my lights, a shape on the shoulder, a silver sedan, parked awkwardly in the dirt, nose angled sharply toward the road like it had stopped mid-turn. No hazards, no engine running, no movement, just sitting there waiting. Normally, truckers stop to help. It's an unspoken rule in this job: if someone's stranded in the middle of nowhere, you check on them. Out here, no cell service means no second chances. But the second I saw that car, something twisted in my gut, a feeling I couldn't explain, only obey. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and as my cab rolled past the sedan, I glanced down. The driver's window was rolled completely down. A man sat frozen behind the wheel, hands at 10 and 2, staring blankly at the road ahead, as if in some trance. But when my lights hit his face, his head snapped toward me, and he smiled. Not a normal smile, one of those impossible stretched too wide grins that didn't look human. Something about the way he held his expression, unblinking, motionless, made my skin crawl like ants crawling under it. I sped up, heart hammering, and checked my mirror. The sedan remained dark, until suddenly its headlights flicked on full high beams, blinding LED white filling my entire mirror. But he didn't pull out onto the road. He stayed there just illuminating me. Breaker 1 to 9, anyone copy, I said into my CB voice, shaky. Got a weird four-wheeler near the clip. Anyone in range, nothing but static. I put the hammer down. My engine growled, the whole trailer shifting under the acceleration. 5 minutes passed and I started to calm down. That was when the headlights behind me moved. The sedan launched forward, dust exploding behind it. Within seconds, those LEDs were searing into the reflective tape on my trailer. He rode right up on me, no more than a couple feet from my DOT bumper. One wrong move, and he'd slide under the trailer and be shredded. I flashed my brake lights. He flashed his high beams back. Then he pulled beside me, matching my speed precisely. 75 miles an hour, his window down, his hair whipping around his face. I could feel him waiting for me to look. I resisted as long as I could. When I finally turned my head, he was already holding something up, something small and black. A walkie-talkie. A beat later, my CB erupted with a crystal-clear voice. "You have a taillight out, driver." I jerked in my seat. That wasn't another trucker. It sounded like he was sitting next to me. I said, the voice continued deeper now, colder. "You have a light out. You should pull over. Let me help you fix it." I didn't respond. I just gripped the wheel until my hands hurt. The voice chuckled. "There's no signal out here, James. You know that. Go on, pull over." He said my name. My first name wasn't on the truck. He shouldn't have known it. That's when I grabbed my phone. No service. The sedan suddenly braked, falling behind me. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then, wham! The entire truck jolted violently. He had rammed me. I struggled to keep the rig straight. By the time I checked my mirrors, he was gone. His headlights were off again. He was somewhere behind me, invisible. Driving a semi at night is stressful enough. Driving a semi at night with a deranged ghost mode tailgater was something else entirely. I was sweating through my shirt, eyes flicking wildly between mirrors. Then, like a miracle, I saw a sign. Rest area, 2 miles. I didn't know if it would save me or trap me, but staying on the open road felt worse. I hit my blinker and rolled down the ramp, praying another driver would be parked there. But the rest area was empty. Just a concrete slab, a flickering orange lamp, and a bathroom that looked like a fallout shelter. I parked dead center in the lot, locked my doors, and grabbed my tire thumper, basically a wooden club truckers use to check tires, and if needed, defend themselves. Minutes passed. No sedan. Finally, I forced myself to inspect the back of my trailer to check the damage. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked around. There was a dent and silver paint on the DOT bar. I turned back toward the cab, and my stomach dropped. My driver's door was open, and sitting in my seat, illuminated by the glow of my dashboard, was him. He lifted my CB microphone to his mouth. The truck's external speaker crackled to life, blasting his distorted voice across the empty highway. "You forgot to check the passenger side, James." Everything froze inside me. The desert, the air, my own heartbeat. Then, instinct took over. I ran. I sprinted toward the restroom building as fast as my legs could push, boots pounding the pavement. Behind me, my truck engine roared, the roar of a machine being controlled by someone who didn't care if they killed me. I dove behind the concrete wall just as my truck smashed full force into the building, headlights exploding, concrete shaking under the impact. If I had been 1 second slower, I would have died right there. I stumbled into the men's room, dark, filthy, and windowless, and locked myself in the far corner stall, gripping my tire thumper like a lifeline. Then the engine cut off. Silence, followed by the heavy clunk of a door opening, followed by footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching across broken concrete. He stepped inside the restroom. His voice drifted through the tiled air. "I found your wallet in the console. You live in Ohio. That's a long drive. You have a daughter, Sarah. Cute kid." My blood ran cold. His shoes stopped in front of my stall. I could see his shadow through the gap at the bottom. 3 soft taps hit the metal. "Check your mirrors next time." Then, the footsteps faded, and the desert swallowed him again. I stayed in that filthy restroom stall long after the sound of his footsteps disappeared. My legs were shaking so badly I thought they might give out, but I didn't dare move. The desert has a way of faking silence, of convincing you it's safe when it isn't. I must have waited at least 20 minutes before finally forcing myself to breathe properly again. I pushed open the stall door, thumper raised high, ready for a man who wasn't there. The restroom was empty. The doorway was empty. The whole rest stop was swallowed in the kind of still, unnatural quiet that only the most remote corners of America can produce. My truck sat crooked against the concrete wall. Headlights shattered the front bumper embedded in the structure like a weapon. The driver's door was still hanging open, swaying slightly in the cold desert wind. The silver sedan was gone. I didn't celebrate. I didn't relax. I didn't feel relief. What I felt was dread, the kind that settles somewhere deep inside your bones and refuses to leave. I walked back to my truck, shaking uncontrollably. Climbing into the cab felt like stepping into a crime scene where I was both the victim and the suspect. Everything had been rifled through. My clothes were scattered, my logbook ripped down the spine, paperwork thrown everywhere. My wallet sat open on the passenger seat. He had flipped through it. He knew everything. I called the police the moment I got service again, which took nearly a quarter mile of limping the damaged truck toward civilization. An officer eventually met me, took photos dusted for fingerprints, and asked the usual questions that made it painfully clear they had already dismissed the incident as either drug-related or mental illness. They promised to look for a silver sedan. They promised to file the report. They promised to follow up. They never did. I couldn't bring myself to do another long-haul run for a while. I stuck to warehouse work for half a year, avoiding the open road completely. It wasn't the darkness. I feared it was the illusion of being alone. The idea that someone could crawl into your space, into your life, without you noticing. But bills don't care about trauma, and sooner or later I had to get behind the wheel again. And that's when the part that haunts me the most came to light. A week after the Mojave incident, I was finally cleaning out the mess inside the truck. I had put it off because I didn't want to relive the memory of him sitting in my seat using my own radio to talk to me. But the truck had to be cleaned before repairs, so I forced myself through it. I lifted the mattress in the sleeper berth, fully expecting to find trash or more damage. Instead, I found a Polaroid photo. It was face down. I didn't want to flip it over. I swear, every instinct I had screamed at me not to. But curiosity isn't a choice, it's a pull. I turned it over. The picture was of me, sleeping. I was lying on that same bunk mouth, half open, dead to the world. The flash had clearly been used. Everything around me was washed in harsh white light. My face looked calm in a way that now makes me sick. I flipped the photo again, hand trembling. There was a date written in thick black marker. The date wasn't from the night of the rest stop. It was from 3 days earlier. 3 days before he rammed my truck. 3 days before I met him on that empty highway. 3 days before he spoke my name over a CB radio he shouldn't have had access to. He had already been inside my truck. He had been watching me sleep. He could have killed me at any point. And the worst part isn't that he didn't, it's that he chose not to. He wanted me awake. He wanted me aware. He wanted me scared. That Polaroid changed everything about how I saw the incident. It meant he hadn't randomly chosen me on the highway. He had been planning this, studying me, waiting for something, or someone. For weeks, I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I'd jolt awake, convinced he was standing over me, holding another Polaroid camera inches from my face. I installed extra locks, bought interior cameras, and checked my cab every single time I stepped inside, even just to grab sunglasses. And I kept that Polaroid. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to remind myself it was real. Eventually, I had to return to the long-haul routes. Money doesn't grow on trees, and trucking is one of the few jobs I know like the back of my hand. But I was a different driver after that. I checked every mirror twice. I slept with a weapon within reach. I never, ever ignored strange cars on the shoulder again. The desert feels different now. The empty highways feel different. The silence inside the cab at night feels inhabited. And here's something I've never told anyone. Not the cops, not my dispatcher, not the coworkers, who kept asking why I suddenly seemed so paranoid. A few months after the incident, I stopped at a rest area in New Mexico. On the wall of the bathroom, written in black marker above the mirror, were 4 words, "Check your mirrors, James." The handwriting wasn't the same as the Polaroid date, but that didn't matter, because the message wasn't what scared me. What scared me was that it hadn't been there when I walked in. There's a certain kind of loneliness you only understand if you've driven the northern plains in January. It's not peaceful or quiet. It's hostile. It reminds you how small you are in a world that would freeze you solid without a second thought. Back in 2011, I was hauling a load north through North Dakota on an overnight run toward Winnipeg. I don't remember the exact freight industrial parts maybe, but I remember the cold. 20 below zero heating system acting up and the kind of wind that slapped the side of my rig like it was trying to knock me off the highway. I'd driven through blizzards before. I thought this would be no different. I was wrong. Around 1:30 p.m., visibility dropped so fast, it felt like someone pulled a black hood over my head. 1 second I could see the faint glow of my headlights bouncing off drifting snow. The next, I couldn't even see my own hood. The road lines disappeared. The world became one swirling sheet of white. My radio kept buzzing in and out with weather alerts about a historic blizzard, but I figured if I slowed down and kept my wheels straight, I'd be fine. Then I passed a sedan, half buried in a ditch, with its hazard lights still blinking through a crust of ice. Then another, both abandoned. That's when the reality finally hit me. If I kept driving, I was going to wreck. A faint, ghostly green light appeared on my right, a highway exit sign, barely visible through the storm. I couldn't read it, but I took it anyway. It was either that or blindly plunge forward into death. The off-ramp led to a long, unplowed service road. An industrial complex, maybe a sugar beet plant, loomed out of the darkness like a dead frozen giant. Silos stood tall against the wind, covered in sheets of ice. No lights, no trucks, no signs of life at all. But there was space. A wide turnaround in front of a locked metal gate. Good enough. I parked my rig in the center of the lot, far from fences where snowdrifts would trap me. The wind beat against the cab, rocking the truck so hard I kept expecting to tip. I checked my phone, no service. Not surprising. But I wasn't scared yet. I had fuel, food, and a sleeper berth to crawl into. I shut the curtains behind the seats, locked both doors. I remember locking them and lay down in the bunk, cocooned in layers of blankets. I drifted off to the sound of wind screaming across an empty industrial graveyard. I don't know how long I slept, but something woke me. And I knew immediately it wasn't the storm. The wind had changed pitch. It wasn't the bone-shaking roar anymore. Just a slow, hollow moan. But that wasn't what bothered me. It was the shift in the air. An instinct. A prickling sensation along the back of my neck. Something was wrong. Then the truck swayed. Not a wind gust. This was sharper, like something heavy, something alive had moved inside the cab. I held my breath and listened. Silence. Then click. The unmistakable sound of a door handle being tested. My blood froze. I knew I had locked that door. I stayed absolutely still, in the darkness gripping the edge of my blanket. If someone opened the door, I would hear the creak. The weather stripping on my old Freightliner always groaned loudly in the cold. But the creak never came. Instead, a faint draft swept across the floor, chilling my feet even through the blanket. That was impossible unless the door was open, or something had disturbed the seal. Hands shaking, I reached for the tire, thumper clipped beside the bunk. It's just a small club used for checking tires, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing between me and death. I pinched the curtain open just enough to look into the cab. The amber glow of my marker lights reflected off the snow outside, illuminating the front seats. The passenger door was shut. The window was up. No signs of damage. Except, the lock plunger was up, unlocked. And on the rubber floor, matte beneath the passenger seat, was a small pile of packed snow. Not loose flakes. Not blown in. A boot print melting slowly into dirty water. Someone had stepped inside. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it echoing in my fingertips. I pushed the curtain aside, ready to bolt into the front seat. As soon as I grabbed my flashlight, I leapt forward, swung myself into the driver's seat, and swept the beam wildly around the cab. Empty. I yanked the passenger door open and looked outside, expecting footprints leading away. But the snow was untouched, perfect and smooth, except for one trail. A single line of footprints led from the far edge of the industrial yard, straight to my passenger door. But none went back. I slammed the door shut, locked it again, and turned in a slow circle inside the cab. Under the seats, behind the seats, between the seats. Nothing. Then I felt it, that prickling sensation, like someone was staring directly at me. My flashlight drifted upward. There's a storage shelf above the windshield in older rigs, a deep shadowed compartment. Mine had a mesh net that was always taut. Tonight the net hung loose. Torn. I raised the flashlight slowly. Two bloodshot eyes stared back at me through the mesh. Wide. Unblinking. Human. A man, thin, filthy, contorted, like a spider, was wedged into the compartment above my head. Limbs folded into the cramped space. As soon as the light hit him, he didn't scream. He didn't move. He pressed a finger to his cracked lips. "Shh," he whispered. "Don't let them hear us." My grip tightened around the tire thumper. My legs nearly gave out. "Get down," I managed to croak. "Get down from there right now." But he just stared out the windshield, trembling violently. "You don't understand," he whispered. "They're tracking heat. If we move, they'll see us." Who, I demanded. His eyes darted back to mine. The Skinners. He dropped from the compartment in a sickening, contorted motion. He landed silently, crouching in the passenger seat like some starving animal. Then he pointed toward the silos. And that's when I saw them. 3 tall, thin shapes pacing along the edge of the light, hunched, drifting, moving with a strange loping gait. Not human. Not in that cold. Not in that storm. "They smell heat," the man hissed. "We need to go. Now." Panic took over. Pure instinct. I threw the truck into gear, and I drove blindly into the storm. I floored the accelerator. The tires spun violently on the ice before finally catching, jerking the whole rig forward. The trailer fishtailed slewing dangerously close to the snowbanks, and the entire cab shook with a deep metallic groan. Behind me, the man in the shredded parka clutched the dashboard like he was bracing for an earthquake. "Faster," he screamed. "They're coming. Don't let them see the heat." I had no idea what he meant, but I didn't need to. I'd seen those shapes near the silos, tall wrong watching us. In that moment, panic didn't ask for explanations. It just grabbed me by the throat and forced my hands to move. Snow blasted across the windshield in white streaks. I could barely see the front bumper, let alone the exit road. "Which way?" I shouted. "Anywhere, but here," he yelled back. The headlights cut through the storm just enough to illuminate the gate. It was nothing more than 2 steel posts, and a gap wide enough for a semi. Perfect, until one of the shapes stepped into the beam. It stood dead center in the road. I barely saw it, just an outline, tall and thin with limbs too long, slightly bent backward at the joints. It didn't flinch. It didn't hide. It just raised its arms slowly, like it was welcoming us. "Run it!" over the man shrieked. I squeezed my eyes shut and braced. The impact shook the truck violently, but it didn't feel like hitting a person. It felt heavier, like hitting a frozen stump buried under the snow. I kept going, and then through the swirling blizzard behind me, flashes of blue and red. Police lights. My heart slammed in my chest. They weren't monsters. They were cops. The reaction inside the cab was instant. I shouted, "It's the police," but the man's expression twisted. All the fear vanished. His eyes narrowed into a murderous glare. "You idiot," he growled. "You led them right to me." Before I could react, he reached into his boot and pulled out a knife. A long rusted hunting knife with dried dark stains along the blade. He lunged with a snarl. I instinctively raised my arm. The blade tore through my jacket sleeve and into my forearm, a hot, searing pain that felt like someone had shoved a branding iron into my flesh. I cried out and kicked with everything I had. My boot connected with his chest. He slammed into the passenger door, wheezing. The knife clattered to the floor. I didn't wait for him to recover. I grabbed the tire thumper with my uninjured hand and swung hard. The sound echoed through the cab. His body crumpled instantly, folding into the footwell like a rag doll. I sat there, shaking blood, dripping down my arm onto the steering wheel. The police lights grew brighter in the mirrors, cutting through the storm. I slammed the brakes. The truck skidded, jackknifed slightly, and slid into a snowbank with a violent jolt that rattled my teeth. I stumbled out of the cab into the blizzard with my hands raised. "Don't shoot!" I yelled, voice cracking. "He's in the truck. He has a knife." 3 officers rushed me, guns drawn. They pushed me down into the snow, cuffed me before I could even explain. The freezing wind bit into my bleeding arm. Behind me, 2 officers stormed the cab, pulled the unconscious man out, and pinned him to the ground. Even handcuffed, he thrashed like a wild animal. They hauled him into a cruiser while I was shoved into the back of another. It took hours to get the story straight. At the station, once they treated my arm, a detective came in with a manila folder. He sat down across from me with a weary expression. "You're lucky," he said. I laughed bitterly. "It doesn't feel like it." He slid the folder toward me. "The man in your truck is named Elias Vane. He escaped a maximum security psychiatric facility 2 days ago. Killed a nurse during the escape." My throat went dry. "He's schizophrenic, violent, paranoid. Claims he's being hunted by creatures he calls skinners." The detective leaned in slightly. "Does that ring a bell to you?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah." He said they could track heat. He nodded slowly, sympathy in his eyes. "Extreme cold and isolation can mess with your head. Whiteout conditions don't help. People see shadows, shapes, movement that isn't there." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But then he opened the folder again. This was in his coat pocket. A small, filthy notebook. He flipped to the last page. Written in jagged handwriting was a list of license plate numbers. Some crossed out, some smeared, some underlined. The last one was mine. My stomach turned. "He didn't just stumble into your truck," the detective said. "He followed you, probably for miles." I felt sick. "How long was he hiding in there?" I whispered. "We'll probably never know." 2 days later, the police asked me to return to the station. They wanted me to sign some paperwork and review footage for insurance. They showed me the dash cam from the cruiser that pulled in behind my truck. Snow whipping sideways. Blinding flashes of red and blue. My figure stumbling out of the cab with my arms raised. "Watch the silos," the officer said. At first I didn't see anything. Then the wind shifted, and just for a flickering moment, a single rotation of the police light bar, I saw them. 3 tall figures standing on the catwalks of the abandoned silos. Not moving. Not bundled in winter gear. Not shaped right. Thin. Elongated. Watching. The officer quickly said, "It's just shadows. Light distortion in the storm. Depth perception issues." He paused. "You understand." I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure anymore what was real. But I know what I saw. Those shapes weren't human. Not in that cold. Not in that storm. Not watching from 40 feet up without moving an inch. And I know this Elias Vane was terrified long before he ever broke into my truck. He wasn't running from police. He wasn't running from me. He was running from something else. Something he believed was in that storm with us. Something that might still be out there. I still drive trucks for a living, but I changed after that night. If the forecast mentions whiteouts, I shut down early. If I have to stop in an empty lot, I park under the brightest light I can find. I lock both doors twice, sometimes 3 times, and every night before I crawl into the sleeper, I shine a flashlight into the overhead compartment. Every single time. Because out on those frozen plains, in the dead of winter, you're not just fighting the storm. You're hoping, praying that the only thing moving out there in the snow is something you can explain. I've been driving the Pacific Northwest for over a decade. Out there, you get used to certain things, rain that never really stops, fog that swallows whole highways, and the occasional deer that seems hell-bent on throwing itself under your wheels. You learn the roads, you learn the weather, you learn what feels normal. This didn't feel normal. It was late 2019, just outside a small town in Oregon, near the Cascade foothills. I was hauling a flatbed full of specialized construction supplies, heavy piping, generator parts, electrical equipment, the kind of load you'd expect for a remote build site. My dispatcher said it was for a private off-grid community, deep in the timberlands. The rate was double my usual pay. That should have been the first red flag. In trucking, when the money looks too good, it usually means the route is dangerous, the receiver is a nightmare, or the whole thing is a mess of bad planning. But my youngest needed braces, my transmission was starting to slip, and rent doesn't care about red flags. My dispatcher, Miller, was an old-school guy I'd worked with for years. Calm, organized, the kind of man who didn't lose his cool over anything. But when he handed me this load, he looked off. "It's way out in the sticks, Jack," he said, tapping a pen against the manifest. "No cell service past mile marker 40. Client wants it on site by 2:00 a.m. sharp. Don't ask why. Just get in, get out. Overnight drop in the middle of the woods," I said. "That's how horror movies start, you know." He didn't laugh. "Just drop it and go." "Don't linger," he repeated. I should have listened to his tone instead of the paycheck. By 1130 p.m., I'd left the main highway and turned onto what they generously called an access road. It was really a glorified logging trail, deep ruts, mud pits, and just enough gravel to keep you from sinking completely. The rain was hammering down in cold sheets, drumming on the cab roof, streaming across my windshield like I was driving through a waterfall. My GPS had given up about an hour earlier, frozen on recalculating like it was having a panic attack. The client had emailed a hand-drawn map with handwritten directions left at the burnt stump right at the rusted gate. It felt like I wasn't just driving off the grid, I was driving back in time. The trees got taller the deeper I went. These weren't baby pines. They were massive firs and redwoods, thick and old, climbing hundreds of feet into the sky and forming a tunnel overhead. Whatever little moonlight there was didn't stand a chance. My headlights just carved a yellow cone through a tunnel of black. Around 1:00 a.m., even the radio gave up. The static faded into nothing. All I had left was the low rumble of my engine and the relentless hiss of rain. I was about 5 miles from the drop site when I saw the lights. They weren't headlights. They weren't streetlights either. They were lanterns. Old-school battery-powered camping lanterns, hung from tree branches on both sides of the road, spaced every 30 or 40 feet. They swung lazily in the wind, throwing shaky circles of light across the mud, and making the trees look like they were breathing. "What the hell?" I muttered, easing off the accelerator. My Jake brake barked into the silence, echoing back at me from the walls of trees. 100 yards ahead, the road was blocked. At first I thought it was a fallen tree, but as I got closer, I saw it was a truck, an old beat-up Ford pickup from the 82nd sitting sideways across the narrow track, completely blocking my path. The hood was up, steam or smoke rising into the rain. My stomach dropped. I checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me but an endless tunnel of black forest. With a loaded flatbed on a muddy logging road, reversing wasn't an option. I'd jackknife before I made it 10 yards. I pulled the air brake. It hissed loudly in the quiet. For a few seconds, I just watched the scene. My hand moved automatically to the tire thumper beside my seat, a heavy wooden club truckers use to check tires. It can do other things too if it has to. I flashed my high beams. The Ford didn't move. Then the driver's door creaked open. A woman stepped out, hunched against the rain. She looked to be in her 50s, wearing an oversized yellow rain slicker that swallowed her frame. She waved both arms like she was drowning. "Help," she shouted, though I barely heard it over the rain. Every instinct told me to lock the doors and stay put. No one sane breaks down on a road like this and just happens to be blocking it perfectly sideways. But the trucker's code is real. Out in nowhere, people either help each other or they die alone. I cracked my window an inch. Wet, cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine mud and rust. "You blocking the road," I yelled. She ran up to my door, looking up at me with big, watery blue eyes. Her hair was plastered to her scalp, rain dripping off her nose. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "My radiator blew. I can't get it into neutral to push it. My husband went to get help, but he hasn't come back. Please, can you help me move it? I'm stuck." I looked at the Ford. It was small. With both of us pushing, we could probably shove it enough for me to squeeze by. If I didn't move it, I wasn't making my drop and I'd be stuck out here all night anyway. "All right," I sighed. "I'll help you push it. Just steer." "Thank you," she said quickly, backing away toward the pickup. "Thank you so much." I grabbed my jacket and slipped the tire thumper into the deep pocket, more for comfort than anything. Then I climbed down into the mud. It was instantly up around my ankles, cold and thick. The rain felt even heavier outside the cab. The lantern swung overhead, making the shadows jump and twist across the road. "Where'd your husband go?" I asked, walking toward the back of the Ford. "Just back that way," she said, waving vaguely toward the wall of dark trees. "He was going to see if he could get a signal." Sure he was. I put my hands on the rusted tailgate. "All right. You get in, steer. I'll push. On 3. She nodded, hurried to the driver's side, and slid in. 1, 2, 3. I shoved with everything I had. The truck groaned, tires sucking at the mud as it shifted an inch, then another. My boots slipped, mud splashing up my legs. "Keep going," she called. We got the Ford about halfway off the track when something under the tarp in the bed caught my eye. The wind kicked a corner of the tarp up just long enough for me to see what was underneath. It wasn't tools. It wasn't camping gear. It was license plates. Dozens of them. Stacked and scattered from different states: Oregon, California, Nevada, Washington, Idaho. Some shiny and new, some old and bent, some with deep scratches, like they'd been ripped off in a hurry. I stopped pushing. My stomach turned to ice. Why the hell does some lady in the middle of nowhere have a bed full of license plates? "That's good," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I can get around now." She didn't answer. "Ma'am," I said, stepping closer to the cab. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. The fear from before was gone. Her expression was flat now, like a mask. Her face was completely relaxed, her eyes calm in a way that felt very, very wrong. "You have a lot of nice things on your truck, Jack," she said softly. The rain might as well have stopped. I heard every word. My heart kicked into overdrive. "How do you know my name?" she smiled, a small, polite smile that never reached her eyes. "Miller told us you were coming." A twig snapped behind me, loud and sharp. Not the light crack of a deer or raccoon, the heavy snap of a boot on a branch. I spun around. They were stepping out of the tree line. Men. 5 at first. Then more. 7. 8. 10. They wore dirty work clothes, flannel shirts, grease-stained jackets, overalls caked in mud, and something darker. They didn't look like a construction crew. They looked like they hadn't left those woods in months. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at my truck, my flatbed, my cargo. One of them, a tall guy with a beard down to his chest, hefted a pair of bolt cutters. Another dragged a tire iron. None of them were rushing. They walked with the lazy confidence of people who had done this before. "Get in the truck, Jack," the woman said from the Ford voice, suddenly calm, almost kind. "Or don't. It's easier if you don't." The bearded man stepped into the middle of the track between me and my cab, blocking my path. "We just need the parts," he said, voice gravelly. "And the truck. We need the fuel. You can have the load, I said, raising my hand slowly. Take the parts. I'll unhook the trailer. You can have it all. He tilted his head like he was studying a bug. No. We need the truck. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement under my rig. Someone was under there, crawling along the frame. Then I heard it, a long, high-pressure hiss. They were cutting my airline. My brakes were dead. My truck, my one way out of that forest, had just become an 80,000 pound decoration. The air hissed violently beneath my truck, echoing through the trees like some kind of dying creature. Anyone who's driven long haul knows that sound, the air bleeding out of the brake system. Once it's gone, the rig isn't going anywhere. They hadn't just trapped me, they'd crippled my only escape. The bearded man stepped closer, rain dripping from the ends of his beard. Behind him, the others fanned out, forming a loose wall between me and the Kenworth. They weren't frantic, weren't shouting orders, weren't even looking around nervously. They acted like this was routine. Like I wasn't the first driver they'd pulled off this road. Or the 10th. Or the 50th. My pulse hammered in my ears. My mind scrambled, looking for angles, openings, anything. You don't want to hurt anyone, I said, even though I wasn't sure that was true. Take the truck. Take the equipment. I don't care. Just let me walk out of here. The bearded man shook his head slowly. There's no walking out, he said. Not for miles. Hills, ravines, old growth. You'd freeze or drown before you reached pavement. Better for everyone if you just cooperate. Everyone. He kept saying everyone like this was a community meeting and not a robbery in the middle of a forest at 1 a.m. Behind me, the woman in the yellow slicker stepped out of the Ford. Her smile had faded. She looked bored now, like the act was over, and she didn't need it anymore. Water dripped steadily from the brim of her hood. We'll make it quick, she said. We're not savages. The men began approaching the truck, climbing onto the frame, yanking at straps and chains, prying open toolboxes with practiced ease. One of them disappeared into the cab. No, I whispered. Not the cab. My daughter's photo was in there. My logbooks. My life. I felt the tire thumper in my jacket pocket. Heavy. Solid. Not much against 10 people, but better than nothing. I took one step back. Just one. The bearded man raised the bolt cutters casually. Don't. Another man came up behind him, carrying something box-shaped, wrapped in a tarp. I recognized the shape. It was one of the generators for my load. They were already unloading the trailer. They didn't care about me anymore. They had what they wanted, which meant I was now a loose end. The forest around us seemed to grow darker, as if it were closing in. Rain hammered the road, turning the mud into a slick, sucking mire. The lanterns hanging overhead flickered. My breath fogged in the cold air. Then, out of nowhere, came the scream of an engine, a loud, high-pitched whine. Not from my Kenworth. This came from up the road beyond the Ford. Headlights exploded through the trees. A second truck barreled around the bend, a dually pickup lifted high, covered in mud and rust, roaring toward us like a charging animal. I thought for one insane moment that it was rescue. Then, I saw the front grille. It wasn't slowing down. The bearded man shouted something. The group scattered some, diving into the trees, others running down the embankment. The woman jumped aside as the truck skidded sideways, tires carving trenches into the mud. The dually slammed into the side of my flatbed hard. Steel screamed, chains snapped, cargo bounced. I staggered backward as the entire rig shuddered. Then, the passenger door of the dually flew open. A man hopped out wearing a soaked camo jacket and a headlamp that cut through the rain like a spotlight. He pointed directly at me. At him, he barked to the woman. She nodded once. The man raised a crowbar. Grab him. Two of the others emerged from the trees and started toward me. That was it. That was my breaking point. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I acted. I spun and sprinted into the woods. Branches whipped my arms and face. Mud sucked at my boots. The darkness was suffocating, but I forced myself deeper, weaving between trees, stumbling over roots. Behind me, I heard shouts, angry, muffled by the storm. Don't let him go. He won't get far. Circle around. They were spreading out. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if I was running towards safety or deeper into hell. I just knew I couldn't stop. The forest dipped suddenly, and my legs went out from under me. I slid down a slick embankment, crashed through a blackberry thicket, and landed in a shallow creek. Ice-cold water punched the air from my lungs. I forced myself up, stumbling over wet stones, fighting the current as it soaked through my jeans. I followed the creek downhill, hoping, praying it would lead to civilization. Behind me, I heard them, crashing through brush. Splashes in the water, voices getting closer. There, downstream. I ducked behind a fallen log, forcing myself to breathe silently. Their headlamps bounced across the dark, scanning the water and the trees. One beam passed inches above my head. Then, slowly, thankfully, they faded upriver. I stayed under that log for nearly 20 minutes, shivering uncontrollably. Only when the woods fell silent again did I crawl out and continue downstream. I don't know how long I walked, maybe an hour, maybe 5. My watch had cracked against a rock. The rain eventually eased to a mist. Then, the mist cleared completely. And there it was. A road. A real paved road with signs and reflectors and fresh paint lines. Civilization. I half-crawled, half-limped onto it just as a pair of headlights approached. A Subaru Outback slowed hazards, blinking, and a middle-aged couple inside stared at me like I'd crawled out of the wilderness, which I guess I had. They called the sheriff. By the time help arrived, the sun was rising. The sheriff's deputy listened to my story without interrupting, though his expression tightened a few times. When search teams reached the location I described, they found my trailer empty. My cab stripped, the mud ruts of multiple truck tires, the old Ford pickup gone. The lanterns gone. Any trace of the people gone. It was like the forest swallowed them whole. A week later, Miller quit dispatching. Vanished from the company overnight. No goodbye. No forwarding address. Nothing. I tried calling him again and again. Straight to voicemail. Eventually the number went dead. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he was involved. I still don't know. All I know is that the off-grid community supposedly receiving my cargo didn't exist. The address on the paperwork was bogus. The company name was unregistered. Someone had used our trucking company to funnel supplies into the wilderness, where a group of people were waiting, organized, prepared, and willing to kill to stay hidden. And they knew my name. For months, I triple-checked every delivery order. I avoided Oregon entirely. I changed my dispatcher. I sold the Kenworth and bought a used Peterbilt I still drive now. But sometimes, when I'm on a dark road in the Cascades and the trees start closing in, I remember the woman's calm voice. It's easier if you don't. And I swear, I still see lanterns swinging in the branches.